Before we let Kachina go, I wanted to acknowledge her accomplishments. Between just finishing your master's and this beautiful presentation, she's now going on in a few months to her PhD. She was instrumental. Yes, let's acknowledge that. She gets to sleep for a couple months, and then she's going to start on a 5-year program. But I also owe a huge thank you to Kachina, for her work helping me on my novel, The Seed Keeper. She really helped me with the language. And also she helped Milkweed develop their own land acknowledgement that is part of the book. So I wanted to just bring her back up here and say what tremendous accomplishments these are. She's a language speaker. She's going on in her education. She is a leader in her community. And I have to say that there is nothing more hopeful to me than knowing young people like Kachina. And so I have just a small gift just to honor her ongoing work and her brilliant future. So thank you. Yeah. Hamataki api, petukinde iushkian wachian kapiyas. Diane Wilson namaki apiya, bede wakantuan oyate hamata hanya. Sichangu oyate ed omawapia. So hello, all my relatives. It's good to see you here today. My name is Diane Wilson. I am a descendant of the Bede Wakantuan Oyate, the Dakota people here in Minnesota, and I am enrolled on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. And I want to say what an honor it is to be speaking today on the ancestral homelands of the Dakota people here in Minnesota, Makoche. And I want to thank the Children and Nature Network, and especially Laura Milan, who is awesome. But I want to thank you for the invitation to be part of this conference. I can't think of more important work that we could be doing in the world than connecting our children with the earth. So thank you all for taking your time and your good energy and bringing your minds together on behalf of our children. And I want to thank you all for sharing your time with me this morning. And I know you have a busy day ahead. So I would like to talk today a little bit about how stories. Oops, I think I'm supposed to. Oh, okay, wait. Yeah, it takes me a minute on the tech. Okay, we got this. But I want to talk a little bit today about how stories are so important in creating the world that we live in, and also in making sure that our children are connected to the earth. So from their earliest days, we are teaching our children through the stories that we tell. And through those stories, they are learning who they are, where they come from, and what their place is in the world. So I'm so grateful to Kachina for laying that terrific historical base. So for those of you who are not familiar with Minnesota Makoche, we are also known as Minnesota, and this is the traditional homeland for the Dakota, Ho-Chunk, and Anishinaabe peoples. The Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota tribes who are spread across Minnesota and North and South Dakota together form the Oceti-Sakowin, or Seven Council Fires. So I like to introduce myself through my books because this will tell you more than anything else how I think and what I care about. And as a Dakota writer, my books are a way of telling written stories that preserve Dakota history and culture while reflecting on our contemporary experience with assimilation, especially with regard to the teachings that are embedded in our traditional stories. All of my work includes the understanding that our children are sacred. Wamana wakan hejala, a gift that must be protected and nurtured at all times. Raising beloved children was the highest priority for the tribe, teaching them to be good Dakota relatives. I wrote my first book, a memoir, Spirit Car, Journey to a Dakota Past, about 5 generations in my mother's family as a way to understand how assimilation has impacted our cultural identity. That understanding led to my second book, Beloved Child, A Dakota Way of Life, and that explores historical trauma through interviews with Native elders and the ways in which we can transform trauma into a better way of life for our children. And my novel, The Seed Keeper, asks how returning to our indigenous seeds can help restore our relationship with the earth. I've also written a middle grade biography of Ella Cara Deloria, a Lakota writer who left us an incredible legacy of recorded language and stories, as well as a picture book, Where We Come From, that encourages children to think about their own family stories. And at the heart of my writing is a commitment to cultural recovery that was inspired by Dakota historian David Larson, who said, "When you know what was taken away, then you can reclaim it." One of the most important teachings for Dakota people is Matakuye Owasi, which means we are all related. Our kinship rules were tribal law. That meant being a good relative to each other and to everyone around us. When we say these words, we are claiming community for all beings, one that is built on respect and reciprocity and love. This relationship was described by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote in Braiding Sweetgrass, "Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. In other words, we become kin with everyone around us." And my understanding of the purpose of this conference is to nurture that kinship with our children. This recognition of the earth as a living entity and host to a community of unique beings with their own spirits dates back thousands of years, expressing a belief that is central to indigenous cosmology. Tewa educator Greg Kahete described this spiritual journey through relationship with plants and animals as the beginning of the first religion, referring to the harmony that was maintained between the hunters, gatherers, and the environment in which they lived. Indigenous peoples survived by learning and observing detailed traditional knowledge about how to live in balance with a particular place. Kahete calls this sacred science, knowing, remembering, practicing, and implementing place-based natural laws, which consist of practical knowledge for survival, as well as reverence for the land, water, and our more than human relatives. Over time, each tribe across the country developed their own specific culture, including language and ceremonies that were unique to the land where they lived. In the Midwest, Dakota people hunted white-tailed deer and bison across the tall grass prairie that once covered the southern half of Minnesota, using the entire animal out of respect for the gift of life. They followed the seasons, moving from camp to camp, knowing when the maple trees were ready to tap, the berries were ripe for gathering, and which part of a plant to harvest for medicine. They knew when the stars aligned for ceremony. After the rivers flooded in the spring, they planted gardens in the fertile floodplains. Through their oral stories and intergenerational teachings, they ensured that this cultural relationship with their homeland would continue for future generations. This earth-centered spirituality was maintained between relatives through reciprocity, the cultural practice of giving and receiving gifts from nature. Indigenous peoples knew that they had to protect and manage their relationships with the land in a way that ensured the survival of all. This relationship is sometimes described as the original agreement between humans and the earth. Our survival as Indigenous people relied on our ability to be intensely present in each moment. We had ceremonies and teachings that helped us accept and release painful experiences. This state of mindfulness was woven into all aspects of Indigenous life, just as appreciation for creative expression and beauty was present in ordinary tools and practical items. Activities like berry picking were not only a means of gathering food, they were also moments of communion, experiencing the reciprocity of giving and receiving with the plant. When we are silent, contemplative, filled with a loving regard for everything around us, we enter into communion with the earth as our mother. Restoring this connection as a daily practice helps us move from the mind back to the heart, reestablishing balance between the body, mind, spirit, and emotions. Being in relationship with all other orders of life is fundamental to Native culture because it keeps the heart open. Equally important was the commitment to passing these teachings to our children. Spiritual leader and elder Clifford Chonku refers to traditional ways of parenting as practicing the 5 stages of life. In the first stage, which is infancy to 2 years old, children were taught to use their 5 senses and to think conceptually beyond their own self-absorbed concerns. For example, the cradle board provided a straight back and support for a child's weak neck muscles. The child begins to strengthen these muscles as they look around. Okay, so we lost our... There we go. Talking too long. The child begins to strengthen these muscles as they look around and become aware of the activity around him or her. As Charles Eastman explained in his book, Indian Boyhood, they learn to watch birds and squirrels and insects, becoming very aware of the natural world at an early age. Embedded within the culture is a way of educating children throughout their lives to successfully achieve the challenges and lessons of each stage of life. As Chief Luther Standing Bear has said, because for the Lakota there was no wilderness, because nature was not dangerous but hospitable, not forbidding but friendly, Lakota philosophy was healthy, free from fear and dogmatism. The old Lakota was wise. He knew that man's heart, away from nature, becomes hard. He knew that lack of respect for growing, living things soon led to a lack of respect for humans, too. So he kept his children close to nature's softening influence. One of the ways that Dakota people maintained these teachings was through our oral storytelling tradition. Children learned stories from an early age that instructed them in their history, cultural values, and identity. Dakota writer Teresa Peterson explained in her book, Voices from Pajutazizi, that the Dakota told 2 kinds of stories. The Wicho-Oyake contain a people's history, migrations, and genealogy, while Hitunkankapi are myths and legends. The role of the storyteller was to remember and pass down stories and sometimes that was hundreds of stories, that preserve our history and culture, that teach values and lessons and entertain. Women served as their tribe's traditional culture keepers, while missionaries sought to displace them through boarding schools and mistranslating oral stories. Today, Native writers are reclaiming our stories as a way to preserve our cultures and help heal our communities. Our traditional stories often use metaphor and other beings, both from the world around us as well as supernatural, to illustrate broader teachings. One well-known story was about a young woman who marries a star, becomes pregnant, and falls through a hole in the sky after picking turnips, a traditional food. She plummets to the earth, where she gives birth to a baby boy, fallen star. He ages quickly and goes on adventures, often assisting tribal communities who are in danger. This myth-like story emphasizes the importance of the Dakota kinship system, of the ancestral relationship between Dakota people and the stars, as well as the importance of helping our relatives. Another important character, the corn wife, is often described in stories as responsible for perpetuating and preserving Dakota way of life. She withers and dies every season in order to come back to life in the spring. Cornwife helps teach us to learn from the plants and animals around us, as their behavior is constantly instructing us in survival, reciprocity, and sustainability. These stories engage both our imaginations and our critical thinking minds so that children understand who they are, where they come from, and what is expected of them in community. European settlers arrived in Minnesota in the 1800s, bringing with them a very different relationship with the land. The clash between cultures that began in 1492 was as much about our drastically different food systems as it was about our differing values, languages, and spirituality. Where indigenous cultures were centered in kinship with all beings, settlers introduced a worldview that regarded land, plants, and animals as commodities that could be bought and sold. When the Dakota were forcibly removed from Minnesota after the 1862 U.S.-Dakota War, they were, in essence, surrendering their traditional foods and medicines as well. In place of a traditional diet, they were moved onto reservations and given commodity foods that were high in starch and fat, a story that was repeated with tribes throughout the nation. As tribes became dependent on government rations, passing on traditional food knowledge and practices became more and more difficult as fewer families continued to hunt, forage, and garden. Beginning in the late 1880s, boarding schools removed children from their families, forbid them to use their language or spirituality, and taught them a different relationship with the earth. The seeds and stories that had helped sustain Native families for many generations began to disappear. In 2002, I participated in the Dakota Commemorative March, a 150-mile walk to honor the 1,700 Dakota women, elders, and children who were forcibly removed from the state. I talked with one of the marchers, Harley Eagle, about how we heal from historical trauma that is the legacy of assimilation policies, from removals to boarding schools and land allotment. Harley told me about the beloved child ceremony that a Lakota anthropologist and author, Ella Cara Deloria, had written about in her novel, Water Lily. This ceremony was held to honor a child whose life had been threatened by accident or illness. An elaborate outfit was prepared for the child that included moccasins that were beaded on the soles, symbolizing how the child would be carried and honored by their families. Deloria wrote, "They were now children beloved. All their lives they would have the right to mark their faces in this manner for important occasions, and people would say of them, 'There goes a hunka,' and that would be an honor. It would mean, 'There goes one whose family loved him so much that they gave a great feast and many presents to the people in his name.' To have something given away in one's name was the greatest compliment one could have. It was better than to receive." Through this story, Deloria preserved the understanding of children as sacred and Dakota parents as devoted to their well-being. For the Oceti Sakowin, the intention has always been to raise beloved children. Understanding how we transform historical trauma into a better way of life for our children became the premise for my second book, Beloved Child, A Dakota Way of Life. When spiritual leader and Dakota language teacher Glenn Wasichana told me, "Heal yourself first," he meant that we do this healing work by returning to the traditional values that every tribe carries. Glenn told me, "Long ago, Dakota people were given all they needed to create a way of life that was beautiful in its regard for all other beings." He was referring to the traditional values that were given to Dakota people as a recipe to live by. When we return to this way of living, we become the people that our ancestors were. We honor the sacrifices they made and the suffering they experienced. When I interviewed spiritual leader Clifford Chanku for this book, he asked me to remind people that the past 500 years is a short time in the history of Native people in this country. The Dakota have been present in Minnesota Makoche for thousands of years, and it's our spirituality that has allowed us to survive. "Tell them," he said, "that's who Dakota people are, not the statistics you read in the paper. We are people who raise beloved children, who treat the earth as our mother, and regard being a good relative to be of utmost importance to the community. Tell them that our ancestors suffered so that we could be happy." From this strong spiritual core flow all of the ways of working to improve the lives and health of Native people. By living each day to the best of our abilities, we practice Wo Dakota, a commitment to the sacred laws and traditions that will help us use our individual gifts to rebuild a better world for our children. Through my work, I have seen how small changes over time can slowly add up to big shifts in the broader community. Choosing to be healthy, rebalancing the physical dimension of the medicine wheel is a fundamental first step to helping children reconnect with the earth. Returning to indigenous foods and gardening is a way of remembering our food is central to all of our cultures, as well as intimately connected to the environmental issues we face. The food choices we make create the world we live in. As Choctaw historian Devin Mahisua has written, "The recovery of the people is tied to the recovery of food, since food itself is medicine, not only for the body, but for the soul and for the spiritual connection to history, ancestors, and the land." So how do we reclaim a relationship with the earth for our children that is based in indigenous principles of kinship and reciprocity? And fortunately, there are all of you here in this room working on that very question. So my own understanding of these principles comes from my garden, my writing, and my work with Native organizations on seed and food sovereignty. Around the year 2000, I was researching my memoir about my Lakota mother and aunts who had grown up in South Dakota at boarding schools on the Pine Ridge and Rosebud reservations. No one in our family knew about the history of boarding schools or why they were established. My memoir, Spirit Car, traced back 5 generations in my mother's family to show how boarding schools and other assimilation programs have worked across generations. And while I was researching the memoir, I heard about a collection of rare indigenous seeds that were being grown out by a tiny, bare-bones Native program called Dream of Wild Health. And when I say bare bones, I mean a couple of shovels. And as an avid gardener, I knew immediately that I needed to be with these seeds, that they were calling many of us to this work. I was fascinated by the stories these seeds were carrying: 800-year-old traditional tobacco, Cherokee Trail of Tears corn, and Hopi black turtle beans. These seeds carried stories of the seasons, of the ancestors who grew them, and the ancient wisdom of the mother plant herself. What I didn't know then was the long history these seeds carried, how close they had come to extinction, nor the important role played by women who had ensured their survival. Despite the many challenges that our indigenous seeds have faced, there have always been families who held onto their seeds and continued to garden. Some of these seeds eventually made their way to Dream of Wild Health through a gift from a Potawatomi gardener, Cora Baker, who donated her lifetime collection of seeds to the farm. She sent the seeds with a letter saying she had prayed and prayed that Indian people would start gardening again. Cora knew that one of the most important ways we rebuild the health of our communities is by returning to gardening and our traditional foods. Her gift of seeds allowed a new generation to learn how to garden and care for them once again. This is the work of reclaiming food sovereignty, Indigenous communities relearning how to grow, cook, and feed their families with healthy, culturally appropriate foods. One of the important steps towards food sovereignty is understanding the legacy left by our ancestors. The teachings embedded in our stories help with the difficult work of cultural recovery as we reclaim what has been displaced and understand the responsibility we carry today. After volunteering for several years, I was hired as the director for Dream of Wild Health in 2008, shortly after they purchased a 10-acre farm. I was blessed to spend time with Native elders, farmers, youth and their families, and the seeds themselves. Each day was a slow unlearning of what I had been taught growing up in public schools. This experience helped me see how the worldview that we are taught as children influences our daily lives and our relationship to the earth. We began each morning in a circle near the fields, all of us coming together for prayer before beginning the work of the day. Arapaho elder, Ernie Whiteman, opened each circle by saying, "Good Native American morning." And even the teenagers couldn't help but smile. We smudged to cleanse our spirits and offered tobacco with prayers in gratitude to the plants, water, and animals who shared that farm with us. Before we planted or harvested or shared a meal, we prayed in circle. And in this way, we learned that when we garden with reverence, then our food truly becomes our medicine. Working together with youth in the fields, sweating under a hot sun while weeding endless rows of beans and corn, taught us that reciprocity can be eminently practical. When we bought the farm in 2008, the soil was exhausted from many years of conventional farming, to the point where some fields were incapable of growing anything without chemicals. After years of prayers, cover crops, and many, many tons of manure and compost, the soil regained her fertility. That is reciprocity. When we saw that the field beneath an enormous utility structure was also nearly barren, we reintroduced prairie plants and seeds that welcomed back native bees and pollinators. That is reciprocity. And when a native youth who had participated in the program for 5 years returned as staff, that too is reciprocity. In our time together at Dream of Wild Health, we learned that seeds are our ancestors and our relatives. They taught us mindfulness, reverence, and taking a long view of our work 7 generations into the future. When we worked in the gardens, the seeds taught us the language of corn and beans and squash. And when we take care of our seeds, they reconnect us with our own stories, with our ancestors, and they heal the broken places in our families. From a place of deep gratitude and love, I grow them in my own garden, protect them through the winter, and give them voice through my writing. Today, the tiny garden where I first volunteered to work with seeds has grown into a successful native-led organization. From leasing a half-acre garden, Dream of Wild Health now owns a 30-acre organic farm in Hugo. At the heart of their work is a belief that we are healing ourselves, our ancestors, and our future generations when we learn how to plant a garden, when we remember to offer prayers to our plants, when we share delicious meals prepared with indigenous foods. Equally important, Dream of Wild Health offers programs to urban Native youth that share this knowledge and prepare them to become stewards for the seeds, our water, and the land. Youth between the ages of 8 to 18 learn culturally based garden, cooking, and leadership skills. They come from diverse tribes and families, some of whom are already powwow dancers, while others are learning about their identities. Each season, we saw how reconnecting with the earth helped shy, insecure youth transform into community leaders. As our children enjoyed foods that were grown from the seeds of their ancestors, their bodies were re-indigenizing from the inside out. Back when I was the director, our dream was to see these youth return as staff for the organization, ensuring that this knowledge was being passed to the next generation. Today, Dream of Wild Health hosts a leadership program for young adults and has hired several returning youth as program staff. Others have graduated from college, some of them choosing American Indian Studies and Environmental Studies as their majors. Restoring food sovereignty through organizations like Dream of Wild Health is also a pathway to building relationships between communities. Coming together around seeds and gardens creates friendship, understanding, and collective resistance to the industrialized farming that threatens the health and well-being of the earth. From a shared commitment to justice and equity, we can build new food systems that honor and respect indigenous homelands, that acknowledge the gift of food from our more than human relatives, and invite indigenous people to lead with their ancestral knowledge. Working together, we remember that a caring relationship with the earth is the birthright of all human beings. As we grapple with changing our systems, there are 2 questions we can continually ask ourselves. Who benefits from a program or new initiative? and who is not at the table. When Arapaho elder Ernie Whiteman told me, "If you can control the food, you can control the people," I realized that I could tell the history of Dakota people through the story of what happened to our food. And that's when I began writing my novel, The Seed Keeper. In many ways, writing this book was my way to reclaim the story of our ancient relationship with seeds, to give back to the people who have shared so much with me, and to help carry this work forward to future generations. As a writer, I feel responsibility to uplift stories that have been silenced, that show our true history, as well as the courage, strength, and brilliance of our communities. And I'm going to read one paragraph from this book that sums up how I feel about seeds. And the novel is actually the story of 4 Dakota women across several generations and how they take care of their seeds and their way of life. And this is a paragraph that is told by the main character, Rosalie Ironwing, who is living on a farm, and she has just learned to garden. "Everywhere I looked, I saw how seeds were holding the world together. They planted forests, covered meadows with wildflowers, sprouted in the cracks of sidewalks, or lay dormant until the long-awaited moment came, signaled by fire or rain or warmth. They filled the produce aisle in grocery stores. Seeds breathed and spoke in a language all their own. Each one was a miniature time capsule, capturing years of stories in its tender flesh. How ignorant I felt compared to the brilliance contained in a single seed. I had begun to see that when we save these seeds, when we select which ones will be planted again, our lives become braided into the life stories of these plants." So that gives you just a little idea of what that book is about. We also teach our children by sharing stories through the books we read to them at a young age. Author and Red Balloon bookseller Joan Trigg has written about the way that children's books are stories that express our adult relationship to nature as they teach our youth about the earth. At an age when children are absorbing the world around them, children's books offer a story that provides a framework to understand their physical experience. These books remind us how powerful imagination and stories can be in creating a vision for the future. While the media focuses on apocalyptic stories about climate change, children's books offer a utopian vision that teaches values, behavior, and our relationship with the earth. They also teach a worldview that can be centered in kinship, such as in books like The Water Protectors, or subverts the lesson of reciprocity, as in The Giving Tree. These stories can be reaffirmed for children through daily interactions with their adults. We can choose kinship-centered activities such as hiking in the woods, planting a garden, and picking berries. Or we can act in ways that instill fear, such as killing spiders, spraying chemicals on unwanted plants, and expressing terror of bees and snakes. As these reactions can be the legacy of how we were taught, perhaps we can try to understand that these other beings can also be a teacher in showing us an aspect of ourselves. Through intentional practice, we can learn to be good relatives even to the beings we fear. As Crystal Echohawk has said, if we change the story, we can change the future. So I would like to leave you today with a story about a young child who was learning to garden at Dream of Wild Health. Just 8 years old, this child reminded all of us of the magic that is possible when we share our love for the earth with our children. On a warm afternoon in mid-June, a small group of children moved slowly down the path between two long raised garden beds. A few of the children were as young as 8 years old. All of them were from Native families living in the Twin Cities. They were Ojibwe, Dakota, Lakota, Ho-Chunk, Oneida, and Diné. Most of them had never gardened before, never held a corn seed in their small, damp hands. One young girl did not know that food bought at the store came from the vegetables harvested daily from the soil. But on this summer afternoon, they were quiet in their anticipation of planting a Dakota corn seed that has rarely been grown, much less eaten, in the many years since the Dakota were removed from Minnesota after the 1862 war. Earlier that morning, in Circle, the children had learned that the garden was on Dakota homeland, land that has not known these seeds for many generations. Afterwards, they listened closely to the instructions from an elder, Ernie Whiteman, who showed them how to plant 6 seeds in each mounded hill, patting the earth firmly over each seed. While the children planted, Elder Hope Flanagan sang a traditional song in her clear, strong voice. As always, the music woke something in each of us, elevating the simple act of planting seeds to a connection with the sacred, a moment of remembering what it means to be human. Even the birds seemed to listen, circling overhead as they drew closer to the fields. In the quiet that followed Hope's song, one of the youngest girls said, "This is how we used to dance for our corn." She slowly moved each foot. She slowly moved each foot in an intuitive dance that reconnected the innocent spirits of these children with their ancestors. As they danced to the blood memory of ancient traditions, the hearts of the adults, all of whom carry the scars of historical trauma, were uplifted. And when we plant Dakota corn with children who have come to learn about their traditional foods, we are reclaiming an ancient relationship with the land. We are recognizing that we are all bound together in a web of relationship, right down to the smallest bacteria. We are remembering that learning about plants and animals was a lifelong commitment, where the real test of living was to establish a balanced and harmonious relationship with nature. Why? Because our survival depends upon it. No matter how daunting the challenges we face today, we are responsible for teaching our children that plants and animals are co-creating this world with us, and the lessons they offer can help us reverse the harms that humans have inflicted. As we say in Dakota, Matakuye Owasi, we are all related. And when we care for the earth, when we raise healthy children, returning to these old ways will help us transcend the trauma of the past and create a new, hopeful vision for the future. When the blood memory of our children remembers the green corn dance, that is the rhythm of the heart calling us home. Pidamaya.